Excavations at the Dalles, Oregon Chinatown started in 2016 as part of the restoration of the last standing building in Chinatown. This building, built in 1879, once housed the Yoon Hong High Company store. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Dalles, Oregon was home to a small but thriving Chinese diaspora community. This community eventually coalesced into a single block near the center of town, fronting on what was then Main Street. In this neighborhood, the Chinese merchandise store arose as a profitable venture designed to benefit multiple partners by providing a variety of goods and services to the local Chinese community and to the larger community as a whole. Historical research and archaeological excavations associated with the redevelopment of this block, detailed in this presentation, have begun to illuminate the lives and contributions of this nearly forgotten community.
Eric, are you muted again?
I guess I was. Okay. The Dalles is located on the traditional lands of the Tenino, Wasco, and Wishram, and the peoples of the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs and the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. The Dalles sits at the south bank of the Columbia River, approximately 80 miles east of Portland. It is at the mouth of Mill Creek and at the foot of an 8-mile-long series of narrows and falls that block upstream steamboat navigation on the Columbia River. For much of its history, the town has served as a hub to the inland Pacific Northwest, supplying miners, cattlemen, sheep herders, and homesteaders. This is an 1867 view of the community. You can see the Catholic church there at the center, and that's looking right at the mouth of Mill Creek with the long sandy area at its mouth. You can also see the Portage Railroad around the falls that had been built just that year. And as you can see, it's a fairly compact community at that time. This is the first really good view that we have of the Main Street area. This is in 1875, following one of a series of floods that would continue to devastate the community. So you can see the Portage Railroad running right down the center of the street, and various assorted wood and a stone building on the right-hand side. Chinatown would eventually become to occupy this block right here in the center of the photograph. So that area where Chinatown ended up coalescing was burned by a fire in 1879. So the fire pretty much burned all of 4 blocks, and only 3 buildings survived the fire. All of those buildings were made either of brick or stone. And interestingly enough, all 3 of those buildings still survive. This is an 1884 view. By then, that block had been completely rebuilt. It had been actually rebuilt even before 1880, because what was happening then was the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. So you can see on this illustration, this is the old Portage Railroad, and then this is the Transcontinental Railroad coming from Portland and heading to points east. It comes and joins the Portage Railroad and runs right down the middle of town through Main Street there. This is a more detailed view from that lithograph showing what was the block that became Chinatown. The Yoon Hong High building is located right here. This is the railroad tracks. And you can see that what happened when they brought the railroad through is they actually raised the grade of the community up to alleviate some of those flooding issues. So you can see a lot of these wood frame buildings are now up on stilts and pilings, and even up to 2nd Street, the sidewalks are up on pilings. So even all of that rising of the grade didn't completely alleviate flooding problems. And so this is a photograph. This is actually the only photograph that we have of the Chinatown area. And this is during the 1894 flood, which was the largest flood in recorded history. And the Yoon Hong High building is located right there. So Chinese really have been part of the Dalles community since the very beginning of the town. The first census of town in 1860 showed 4 Chinese, 3 males working in the laundry business. And you can see the community really peaked in the 1880s, 1890s, and then slowly declined through time. And one of the things to think about, get through all of my pages, is that all of the floods and fires and everything that went on through town and the filling really was fortuitous in the preservation of the archaeological collection, because you had a community that was once the center of town, which later, because of the railroad, became marginalized, and then slowly but surely got redeveloped over the years. And the redevelopment really consisted of tearing buildings down and filling them up and making parking lots. So the underground resources are really well preserved at the site. So due to the intricacies of federal, state, and local laws, rules, and regulations, partnerships in the merchandise store became one of the few routes for stability for Chinese residents. However, even invested merchant partners sometimes had to perform outside labor to get by. While many immigrants to the US have crossed back and forth between the lines of laborers and merchants, or used work as laborers to step up into business, the Chinese as a group were subject to specific and ever-changing regulations, some of which Chelsea just previously talked about, that circumscribe their daily lives and restrict their opportunities in the United States. The changing circumstances that they lived under are reflected in the communities of themselves and the businesses that they operate. So this, I go through a series of sand-borne maps here that had the Chinese businesses identified in them. We also used local directories to try and tease out what some of these businesses were. So you can see that they're kind of color-coded by business type. Unfortunately, a lot of are just labeled Chinese, so we don't really know what kind of business or whether they were just used as dwellings. But you can see change over time. So 1884 was the first map. 1889, you can see the Chinese community spread out over Main or Front Street. Mostly Chinese other businesses or laundries were pretty much the two kind of predominant uses at that time. By 1892, so 10 years after exclusion, you have the rise of the merchandise store. You can really see that here with the merchandise stores really starting to become centered in that one part of the community. By 1909, there were very few laundries compared to previous years, but you can also see the rise of the restaurant and also a Chinese operated hotel. By 1926, it's more lodging and merchandise stores, just 2 merchandise stores left by then. And by 1942, the sole Chinese merchandise store was the Chu and Company store, which would end later on in that year. So Jackie went through census records and tried to look at the occupations of individual Chinese. Unfortunately, the census records kind of vary in their quality and who was recording what. But you get a kind of an idea that merchants were a pretty steady part of the community from the 1880s till the 1940s. This is an example of just some of the merchants and their families who operated Chinese mercantile stores on Main Street, which later became known as First Street. Over the years, there were 14 different mercantile businesses in the Dalles, providing partnerships and merchant status for over 38 people. Only 4 of the businesses supported merchants who were able to bring their families from China. A total of 5 families, which included 6 wives and 12 children, were supported by the merchant stores here, and at least 5 children were born here in the community. This is the remnant facade of the Chu and Company store. This was the longest operating Chinese store in the Dalles, operating from the 1880s till 1942. It was located at 214 East First Street. And in the beginning, brothers Wang Ling and Wang Cheung ran the business. Wang Cheung was probably the first to be known locally as Chuki, also named after his store or known after his store. Reportedly, he arrived in the Dalles as early as 1869. His brother Wan Ling joined him in the store in 1892 and eventually took over the business. The Chuki and Company store sold a variety of goods, including groceries, clothing, and teas. Room behind the stores were used as living quarters, and some were occupied by the merchants and their family, while others were occupied by lodgers. By 1915, because of his good standing as a merchant, Wang Ling was able to bring his wife Chen Shi and their son Guan Jing to the Dalles. Wang Ling lived at the store on First Street until his death in 1942, and he's buried in the local Oddfellow Cemetery. His son, known as Jin Wang, when he started going to school, is pictured here at his both during his grade school and in his high school yearbook during his graduation. He served in the U.S. Army Air Force during World War II and afterward married and raised a family in Portland. In 1911, both Yoon Hong and his partner brother Li Wang were denied merchant return status. I skipped ahead. From 1894 until 1913, Yoon Hong and his partners were proprietors of the Wing Hong Hai Company Chinese merchandise store at 210 East First Street. Yoon Hong came to the U.S. in 1882 and a year later moved to the Dalles. He worked for a time as a cook and janitor for the French family who were prominent local bankers. The Wing Hong Hai Company store and the Yuan Hai Laundry served as a partnership with his older brother, Li Yun But. Having a laundry business in the same building as the store would eventually negatively affect Li Yun Hong's merchant status and his ability to bring his wife and family to the U.S. Over the years, at least 7 Li brothers, cousins, and relatives joined the company. Typically, one or more partner managed the store, while the other partners visited China or pursued other types of work. As partners changed, Li Yun Hong remained as the primary manager. The 1900 census lists 9 residents living at the store, 3 partners, 4 other laborers, and 2 cooks. In 1911, both Li Yun Hong and his partner and brother Li Wing were denied merchant return certificates. The Immigration Status Service had begun to scrutinize Li Yun Hong and the Wing Hong Hai partners prior to their travel request. They discovered that Li Yun Hong had been arrested in San Bernardino, California that January, where he had been caught allegedly helping to smuggle Chinese across the Mexican border. Following these investigations, Li Yun Hong was regarded with suspicion by immigration officials. However, the residents of the Dalles regarded him as a likable, successful businessman. When he died in an automobile accident in 1912 at the age of 45, the Dalles Chronicle headlined "Popular Local Chinaman Killed." The Dalles band led his funeral procession to the cemetery, while incense burned outside the door of his store in Chinatown. Li Yun Hong left no will, but he had over $2,000 in cash and approximately $270 worth of goods in stock. His widow decided to retain the quarter interest in the store so that their son could come to the U.S. and run the store when he got older. This never happened, as the loss of Li Yun Hong eventually marked the end of the business. The Gleason Company, operated by the Li family from Taishan, beginning in 1893 and lasting until 1917 at 216 Main Street. Members of and others from the Shanglan village were also formed partnerships in the business. Over the years, there were 3 to 5 partners. The business sold merchandise and drugs and served also as a bank. As the partners established their business and their merchant status, they brought their families from China. However, over the years, only one family at a time lived at the business. In total, the business supported 3 families, including 4 women and 6 children. And there were at least 5 other partners. Among those partners were Li Jack, the last manager of the Gleason Company store and the mayor of Chinatown. He first came to the Dalles or to the U.S. around 1877. Under Li Jack's management, the business expanded, and in 1917, the business reorganizes the Kang Chang Wo Company. the Kang Wo Company shifted focus, stocking items that appealed to a wider audience. Immigration inspectors who visited in 1920 described it as a bona fide establishment with a very attractive stock of goods on hand, as can be seen on his business card. In the 1920s, Lee Jack's son and the store did business mostly with white people and only a few Chinese. However, a contemporary newspaper article stated that the store is regarded as the headquarters in this Chinese district, where the community gathered for news, social functions, and activities such as decorating the parade float for the county fair. In 1929, Lee Jack moved his family and the stores to Portland. In 1936, he sold the business and traveled back to China with his wife and youngest son. The Wing Yuan Company was in business from 1909 to 1918 at 208 East First Street, run by members of the Sit family from Cheung Village in Xinghu District. The company sold Chinese merchandise and did labor contract. In 1915, the company consisted of 5 partners. 3 of the partners were active in the day-to-day operations, and the others were silent partners who did not live in the Dalles. In 1915, Sit Bak applied to bring his wife Feng Shi and 3-year-old daughter Kuei Feng to the Dalles. 2 sons and another daughter were born in the Dalles. Sid Juk died in 1921, and his family remained in town for another 5 years. In 1926, Feng Shi and her young children traveled back to China. The children obtained the paperwork necessary to return, but Feng Shi did not ever intend to come back. So on this series of maps, I showed the excavation units in red, and this is the Wing Hong Hai Company store here. So we excavated 4 units directly back behind the store as part of the restoration work, and also 1 in an area a little a ways from the store so that we could get an idea of what was going on another part of the site. So you can see that the store started out as kind of a block about 20 by 60 feet long and then expanded off the back. And by 1889, there was a platform there, which was used to dry laundry. 1892, that platform is still there under where we excavated the excavation units. By 1900, the platform had been closed in and was now a wash house. By 1909, the wash house was still there and the laundry was in the back of the store. And a platform probably for drying clothes had then been built back behind the wash house. Conditions were still pretty much the same in 1926, which is getting near the end of its use as a Chinese store. So the excavations were done by a crew of volunteers, all trained archaeologists, and it's great to have them come out and help with this project. It turned out to be more extensive than we had anticipated. You can see that the whole area behind the store is a little sunken. It had been excavated out during one of the remodels in the 1940s, and I really didn't expect to find much back there, but I was quite wrong. So we did open houses as well. So this is one of the open houses. Members of the community came out and toured the site and asked lots of questions. So this is test unit 4, which was located directly behind the building. We had to cut out some of the concrete slabs that had been poured in 1940. You can see this first layer has rubble from the restoration or the reuse of the building. So they expanded a doorway there. So just kind of threw the bricks down there and then poured a concrete slab over it. You can see the only intact opium pipe bowl that we found was right there under the concrete. This is after we stripped off some of that construction debris and had intact deposits. And then you can see this layer is actually pretty devoid of artifacts. There's a wine bottle here, and it's really clean. This is actually silts that we think are deposited by the 1894 flood. And this shows the impression of the base of that wine bottle, those flood deposits. You can see how the cultural midden deposits are up here, and then this is a really clean deposit, and then the midden deposits pick up right underneath the flood deposits. So this is what's exposed underneath those flood deposits. So a variety of both Euro-American ceramics and English ceramics and Chinese ceramics. And then the basal cultural level is got artifacts associated with the burning of the building that had been here before 1879 when this building was rebuilt. What it turned out that we excavated in the back was the cellar from the earlier building. When they built the replacement building after the fire, they built it smaller and out of brick. So that left a whole cellar hole in the back to fill up with debris over the years. And this is just an advertisement for the first store that occupied the new building, a shoemaker and shoe seller and sewing machine and watch repair place. We found artifacts associated with that first occupation. So this gives you an idea of some of the density of the cultural material. So this is about half of a 5-gallon bucket that's been wet screened. You can see it's pretty well full of ceramics and bone and other kinds of artifacts. This is what things look like when we removed them from the screen and then after they've been kind of washed and cataloged. So we found artifacts associated with, pretty much all varieties of the use of the building. So this is the use of the building as both a store and as a laundry. So lots of buttons and safety pins, and also ceramic vessels and bottles as well. Probably also associated with the residency of quite a few people and their use of the building and a kitchen as well. So this shows some of the density of the faunal remains. We had really quite a lot of faunal remains. So, and then the Chinese Exclusion Act documents also document the use of gambling tables at the back of the store. This was also another reason why Yoon Hong's merchant status was questioned, because this was an illegal activity. They, of course, said that they were old and nobody used them anymore, but the inspectors noted that they were clean and set up and ready to go. So, and we found quite a few artifacts associated with this, coins and gaming tokens, buttons that could be used as gaming tokens. So we've made a few observations and have a few questions. These are only just some of them. I'd like to touch on maybe a couple of the questions. We'd like to kind of look at the commercial adaptation over time. So how the stock and use of the building changed over time. And we think we can do some of that just because it's a pretty nicely stratified deposit. We're just now working our way through the collection with kind of a finer tooth comb that has been used in the past. So we're hoping that we can really get at some of those questions. We also would like to use that stratification and the kind of artifacts to try and see if we can look at individual events such as the fires and the floods, which I think we can do those pretty easily, but also see if we can identify individual meals and the discarding of those meals and police raids. That we have newspaper accounts of Chinatown being raided for both opium and gambling, holiday celebrations, and the building renovations. So of course, no project like this goes on without a lot of help. So we have more people than could fit on the slide to thank. But anyway, that's about it. Thanks.